What if everything you thought you knew about where Native Americans came from is only half the story? For much of the last century, the story seemed settled. Textbooks and documentaries repeated the same tale, that the very first peoples of the Americas came exclusively from Siberia, crossing the icy Bering Land Bridge about 13,000 years ago. It was presented as fact, almost unquestionable. But what if that was only part of the truth? What if other frontiers, other points of origin, were quietly written into our DNA, waiting to be uncovered? In 2023, a groundbreaking genetic study published in Cell Reports challenged the simplicity of this narrative. Researchers traced one of the founding maternal lineages of Native Americans known as mtDNA haplogroup D4 hours, and particularly its subclade D4H3A, not back to Siberia, but to the northern coasts of China. That revelation is astonishing. It suggests that the story of America's first journey is more tangled, more interconnected, and far more human than we ever imagined. The old myth cracks open, replaced by a vision of migration shaped by many currents, not just one frozen bridge of land and ice. The genetic trail doesn't just whisper of a single crossing, it reveals two great pulses of human movement, two moments when survival and opportunity pushed families outward from northern coastal China. The first came during the last glacial maximum, roughly 26 to 19,000 years ago, when the world was locked in its coldest embrace. Ice covered vast territories, resources dwindled, and some groups were forced to push into unknown lands in search of food and shelter. The second wave followed as the planet began to thaw, between 19 and 11,500 years ago. Ice sheets melted, seas rose, and entire landscapes shifted. These were not isolated wanderers. The evidence comes from a sweeping analysis, 216 modern mitochondrial DNA samples, many newly sequenced, and 39 ancient ones, carrying the D4 hours lineage. Within these strands of genetic code, one branch stands out, D4H3A. Its mutations link tightly with ancient remains in northern China, making clear that this region wasn't just a side note in the story of early Americans. It was a root source, a place where the journey began. If the ice sheets closed off the overland corridor through Canada, how could people possibly have reached the Americas? The genetic evidence points to a bold alternative, the Pacific Coastal Route, sometimes called the Kelp Highway. Picture small groups navigating rocky shores and icy waters, guided not by open plains but by the rich abundance of the sea. Along this watery path, kelp forests, fish, and marine mammals offered a lifeline, making the journey feasible even in an age of glaciers. Archaeology echoes this story. Stemmed projectile point stone tools with notched bases appear in ancient sites across northern China, in Japan, and in early American layers like Cooper's Ferry in Idaho. The resemblance is too close to be coincidence. These tools speak of a shared technology, perhaps even shared traditions, moving with people along the Pacific Rim. And the genetic signals deepen the link. Y chromosome lineages mirror the maternal story, showing that both men and women, whole families, left northern coastal China and carried their legacy into the Americas. And yet, even as the evidence grows clearer, new questions rise like shadows we cannot quite touch. Exactly where in northern coastal China did these journeys begin? The study narrows it to a vast region stretching across provinces and ancient shorelines. But no single settlement, no hearth, has yet been identified as the cradle of departure. The ground still holds secrets. What truly pushed these people to leave? Climate pressure is the obvious suspect. During the last glacial maximum, bitter cold forced communities to the edge of survival. Afterward, warming seas redrew maps and erased homelands, But climate alone cannot explain the courage required to risk an ocean. Were these explorers driven by scarcity, curiosity, or something else entirely? And how many were they? Were these voyages the work of small families, clinging together in fragile craft, or larger bands moving in waves? Did they mix with Siberian groups along the way, leaving behind invisible threads in the genetic fabric we have yet to unravel? For now, these mysteries remain open. This discovery doesn't just adjust a footnote in anthropology, it rewrites the stakes of the human story. To recognize northern coastal China as a source of early Native American ancestry is to see migration in a new light, one defined not only by survival, but by vision and daring. Imagine the courage it took to set out along icy, storm-battered coasts, guided only by instinct, memory, and the promise of a better life across waters no one had mapped. It also changes what it means to talk about origins. Native American ancestry is not the echo of a single Siberian corridor, but a tapestry woven from multiple starting points, multiple peoples, and multiple acts of resilience. Genetic evidence, archaeological parallels, and climatic reconstructions now align to show that the first journeys into the Americas were diverse and dynamic, not a single one-way passage. And with this, the coastal route hypothesis is no longer fringe speculation. It becomes the most compelling pathway where DNA, tools, and the very rhythms of the Ice Age converge to tell the same story. For indigenous communities today, these findings are more than data points on a chart. They are reminders that ancestry is not a straight line, but a web of journeys spanning coasts, climates, and centuries of adaptation. The first Americans carried with them not only genes, but stories of survival, of ingenuity, of families who chose to face the unknown. Their heritage runs deeper and wider than a single ice crossing. It is oceanic, continental, and enduring. For science, the revelations highlight how much of the map remains blank. Too few ancient DNA samples have been recovered from coastal and maritime zones, the very places most critical to this story. Dating methods continue to improve, but more precision is needed. Archaeological discoveries, stone tools, hearths, even footprints must be placed within this expanding genetic framework. Each answer deepens the mystery, urging us to keep searching, to keep listening to the echoes buried in earth, ice, and bone. So here's the loop we started. You asked whether the dominant narrative Siberia to America was the whole story. It turns out, it isn't. Northern coastal China enters the frame not as a periphery, but as a central contributor. The first Americans then were voyagers over ice, seas, coastlines braving climates we barely comprehend, carrying with them matrilineal and patrilineal lineages we are only now beginning to map. Imagine standing at that coastline in ancient times, seeing glacial packs, storms, unknown waters ahead. What stories those first travelers carried, and what courage they must have had. If this journey doesn't change how you see origin, I don't know what will. If you found this surprising, stay with us. Prehistoric Shadows will continue to untangle these mysteries. Drop a comment. What ancestor journey story shocks you the most? And if you're curious, dig into the full Cell Reports paper, because every new ancient genome we find is another piece of the puzzle.